This episode of I Was a Teenage Film Snob is not brought to you by Reading Cinema, but I wish it was. They're great. Give me a call, guys. Welcome to I Was a Teenage Film Snob. I'm James Chalmers, and yes, I was a teenage film snob. This week's guest is a man who I recorded with a long time ago, about 10 years ago now, on a show I used to do called Schwoodcast with my friend Tom Woodward. And ever since then, I would say every 3 months or so, he has sent me a message or given me a call or a little message or like a little message on social media. Hey, we should record again. And I'm always like, yeah, we will. And then it just didn't end up happening. And then he never appeared on the show I did with my wife, Tina, or my friend, Nick. We did a show called Pass the Remote, which I've talked about on previous episodes. And the scheduling never worked out. And the requests over the last few years became more and more frequent. So much so that I believe it was in last year's Christmas card, where after all of his Christmas messages, there was a PS, we should record soon. And little did he know that right before COVID, I was actually planning on doing a show with him. I'd actually reached out to him and said, hey, we should do a show together. And I was kind of envisioning that now that I own my own place and have a daughter, that maybe like once a fortnight or once a month we'd go to the movies and watch something and talk about it. But then COVID hit and we couldn't do it. So it made absolute perfect sense that one of my first guests on this new show that I'm doing, that he should appear. They say that almost everything in life can be tracked back to your parents, so I guess tonight we'll find out. Please welcome to the studio my father, Graham Chalmers.
Good evening, how are you? That was magnificent, wasn't it?
It was. Did you like the sultry tones?
I did. I just was going to say something, which is nothing unusual. Glenn Wheatley died yesterday.
Okay.
And probably don't know much about Glenn Wheatley.
No, but that's not unusual for me because as people will learn the more they listen to the show, I don't know much about anything outside of movies, and even then it's questionable.
This goes back. Glenn Wheatley, I actually babysat his wife. Not as a wife, but as a little girl. So they lived in Strathmore, Gaynor and her sister, and mum and dad in this house in Strathmore, and I used to occasionally babysit. And she then had a boyfriend who drove a Ferrari, and that was Glenn Wheatley. And just a magnificent family. But the thing about that is that I had met him earlier in a different disguise, because he was also the bass guitarist of Masters Apprentices.
Okay.
Which was a really psychedelic type of band, Jim Keith, thumping Jim Keith. And some guys that I used to hang around with all played in the band, not that band, another band, and they were the backup band for Masters Apprentices at the Reservoir Church Hall, really big auditorium for about 150. And one of the biggest thrills of that night was one of the guys in our group knocked off the brush of one of the band members because they all had long hair, and that was exciting. And so that was the first acquaintance of Mr. Wheatley, and then through his wife, who used to play in a TV series called Skyways and other shows. And then to hear on the news that he died of COVID-related illnesses at 74, and the man looked very healthy, but also famous for being the man that put his house on the line to produce John Farnham's You're the Voice.
Yeah, I was just did a quick Google search while you were talking because I knew I recognised the name. I thought it was John Farnham's manager or involved with that. Yeah. And Vanessa Amorosi, I think, as well.
Yeah, and Delta Goodrem.
That's who it was, Delta Goodrem, not Vanessa Amorosi.
So there's some sort of relationship, or not so much relationship, but similarity between him and Michael Gudinski, who are both in the same sort of areas.
Mm-hmm.
So, another loss of another very important person in our music history. And I just mentioned that in passing, mainly because I could say that I actually babysat his wife. But it sounds a bit weird, but then that's what happens when you get old. But if you look in history, the age of 74, somehow you've got to go 73, 75, because a lot of people die at 74. So I'm now trying to work out a way that I might be able to get onto one of, Richard Branson's Sky Travel and just disappear for a year and come back. And hopefully not disappear and never come back because they made a mistake with the fuel. We ran out and we just crashed. That would be terrible. But I got distracted, which is nothing unusual.
That's okay. So, look, there's a little bit of structure to this show, but we do allow tangents, and I imagine that once we get started proper, we will go on a few tangents because what we're going to do tonight is talk about some of your favorite movies, which is what we do with all of our guests or most of our guests. And but before that, we do like to talk about, I suppose, the humble origins in which they became either very serious or casual film fans. So I guess I let people know I was a teenage film snob, but I guess I want to know if you were. And it's going to be interesting for us because obviously, being your son, our history with film is very much tied to each other. And I said at the start that you kind of blame everything, like everything about us, we blame on our parents. And my love of film is no exception because the two biggest memories of movies for me growing up were Mum walking me down to the library when I was about 5-6 years old, and you taking us to the video store every Friday night, which was a huge part of my life. And for those who are young enough to not remember, or too young to not remember, the video store was a building, Hugo, before Netflix, and you would get VHS tapes. And I still have my VHS tapes. So what was it for you? I mean, we'll obviously get to the fascination with the video store as it progressed, but what was your relationship with film like when you were a kid? Because I really don't know. Like I know very little. So what was it like?
Well, if we go back in time, Melbourne was saturated with theatres, and those theatres would have been live or film theatres. So I remember in the city where they're now doing Moulin Rouge, there was a film there that was called the Magic Christian. The Magic Christian? With Ringo Starr. I might be wrong with a part of it. But it was a very interesting movie. So movies were a big part in the sense that they were a production. It was theatre or the local theatre, and you'd see back in our area in Essendon, where you would have done something to do with school, some sort of event. There was a little theatre there. I think it was called the Royal. And you used to go there on a Saturday and you'd watch a cowboy or a Western type movie and throw Jeffers down the aisle and stuff like that. So that's where it came from. So, we might have got dropped off by mum or dad and then we'd sit there in the movie. And that's where it all began. It was a big production. But like everything, I heard this discussion on another person, whereas when we went into the city, we wore a suit.
Yeah,
we were dressed up. You wouldn't be wearing your bikini in the city like you do now, or try and find a bit of cotton big enough to cover you. But the reality is that it was a dressed-up occasion. And going back to my grandparents, the male would usually wear a hat. And it was so very, very formal. And in all that, and particularly, I wrote something on my Facebook page, fairly broad comments, as I usually do. But I was talking about growing up and at school. I used to get beaten up a lot at school, either by the teachers or by the kids, because I was the shortest one and they could beat me up. So it was good fun, and I hated school because and I was lucky because one of the English teachers, who was a Christian, used to give me the cuts nearly every day, and I blessed him for that, thanking him very much for the religious experience that my hands felt on the occasion. They were absolutely stinging. But see, I got a smile on my face. I'm not allowed to kill someone. So, but having said that, no, I'm not going to go and kill him. But he was living around this area we're in at the moment. Um, so there's that transition where we went from the Suits to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and at school you couldn't have your hair above your below your collar,
Yes, I've heard this.
and so we would do assembly, and one of the best things about growing up at that time was is the Ferris Bueller movie connection, is that you just had to abuse the system to stamp your authority on who you were as a person.
Sure.
And Ferris Bueller is a typical movie where you see these characters. I love it,
Mhm.
but I won't go any further with that. Um, but the reality is that so you went from having basically no hair, and then you start to get long hair, and now I've gone the reverse and got no hair. But during that time, the whole society changed, and so did the way we saw things, and even then we might have had VHS, but we were going through things like cassette players in the car,
Yeah.
and they used to be big cassettes. Like the thing was about about that big. You slid it in and then you got the little cassettes, which would invariably get caught in the machine and half the tape stuck in the machine. And there's another one gone and gone. And you're thinking, oh, well, it was a rubbish one anyway. But so a lot of things during that time, people of my age challenged things. A little bit older than me because we had the Vietnam War and that sort of stuff, which goes on to another movie which I like, but I'm not going to tell you. Is we saw things in a different way because we grew up with things changing very quickly. And I remember when there was a bombing overseas, and we were living at that stage down in Keilor, opposite the pub, and we're watching this happening on TV instantaneously.
Mm.
Now, when you talk about that, and that's going back, probably 30 years ago, James, maybe about 30 years ago, because we were living in next to where Dottie was. And it may be a bit older, but younger. But so our communication changed. And so things like VCRs and all that sort of stuff in videos. So the traditional thing of seeing, I remember my dad and mum going to the movies at a drive-in, which would be unusual because then Dad had to walk to the aerodrome from where the drive was, which is about 700 kilometres, and it was the longest mile, which was really that prison scene where all the inmates were against the guards.
Yep.
And it was called the longest mile, but it actually had a different name originally. And so things became different. All the movies that previously were fairly calm and, well, not calm, I mean, but they were in a structured environment. Then you had you had drive-ins, and then I remember taking Mum and Dad to the pictures one time, and I went and saw Ryan's daughter. Now, you won't have even heard of it. You know
No,
about it?
I've heard of it. Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
So I'm sitting there with mum and dad, and then there was a pair of breasts that came on the screen, which wouldn't leave the screen. And all I wanted them to do, and mum's sitting there and dad's sitting there, and you've never seen breasts on a movie ever. So all of
Wow.
these things, normally a 32B, and now a 700C in cinematography, the hugest things you've ever seen. You wouldn't let them on the beach. But anyway,
It's so funny. You touched on a couple of things. The first one being drive-ins, which is still around. You know, there's still a couple left
absolutely.
and Australia had a drive-in boom, like especially in the late 70s, early 80s. That's when we really, and that kind of whole. I don't mean to cut you off. Sorry. That whole kind of Australian underground cinema really exploded. You know, that's when you had those exploitation films, or the Ozploitation films, as they call them. And we really start to make our map on the globe. The other thing, of course, which is true to this day, is whenever a teenager watches a movie, there's absolutely no nudity in it at all until mum and dad walk past, and then you can't escape it, which I think everyone's experienced. So I just thought it was funny.
And that's another thing about that movie, about those kids in a movie where everything that can happen does happen almost. And at the same time, Australia had an avalanche of movies like Alvin Purple, and the now respected actress who was married to Darren Hinch, her name will come to me. She was in that in an American movie, Violence. She plays a grandmother and this sort of stuff. Why can't I?
Is it Jackie Weaver?
Jackie Weaver.
She's been a bunch. She was in, especially like the last few years, she's done some really respectable things like Animal Kingdom, and I mean that's a 15-year-old.
She was also in some respected movies back in the 80s, and the 70s. She got her boobs out more times than
I was waiting for it. The amount of times I've heard you go rant about Jackie Weaver, I was waiting for
it. Yeah. Well, look, we won't go any further there, but there was just a whole series, and puberty blues and all these things. The surf culture, which goes, takes movies to a different degree, because every year you'd go down the beach by the surf, and my mates and I, we'd hang out down near Anglesey or Lawn, and anywhere in between where you could go surfing. I was a pretty good surfer, but once I stood up, I was pretty ordinary. But I lay on the board a lot, because when in a wetsuit, I look like a dolphin.
Me too. Or Danny DeVito was the penguin. That's what I look like in a wetsuit. So.
But there'd always be a surf movie at the local hall, the dawning of the earth or something. And so the latest surf movie would be on, and everyone would come out of their tents to come in and see it. They've got their zinc cream on their nose, because you had to do that when you go to the theatre at night. So everyone can see where you are, because you've got the bright pink or orange on. And so a culture of movies was there. And because that was a time when you as young people would go and see movies that you wanted to see, which your family never would have seen. And so, I was born at a time where the universe changed so much in such a short period of time. I was listening to someone speak the other day, and it's a bit like our music in the fact that a lot of people are dying now, and it happens. It's one of those things, I was watching something today where someone was dragging a coffin across the beach, and I'm going, now that's interesting. That's a little bit like John Cleese, but they did that on a raft. The thing that's is that I think people were very challenged by the opportunity of having all these forms of media in whatever shape you wanted to do, that never existed before, and everyone was challenged by it and needed to do it. All we've done since the 70s and the 80s is got better equipment.
Mm.
You know, the people who were inspired are still inspired because they're still making movies. And some of them backyarders, and some of them are sort of trendy, whatever. But unlike the music hasn't sort of sat in a corner. It hasn't actually gone in any great lengths. You know, if I see another video clip with Taylor Swift, I will cut my own throat. You know, the only thing that she's got is long legs, and she's a very attractive young lady, and probably a lot of people love her singing. And I'm not going to go any further, but you know, then I mean, Joe, when you start to see people from your era, and they don't quite look the same as what they did then you're going, like you see Led Zeppelin when they have a special honour, and they've all got their chains around their neck and they're all wearing suits, and then you go back, no, that's not them. I remember what they were really like. And then you see, you go back, and these are the same people that had such a big influence. You know, what they were doing back in those days was remarkable and challenging and tested people. But anyway, I detract. Music and film are significantly related, because the soundtrack or whatever music goes with the film can either be a disaster or it's a winner. Fantasia is a winner because, as you pointed out when you were singing the song, well, you didn't sing a song, you go da 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 da. Which
it's. I mean, look, even if you haven't seen the film, and spoilers, I haven't. Like, and I should have. I've got Disney Plus. There's no reason why I shouldn't have seen Fantasia by now. I just haven't got around to it. But everyone knows the dun 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 dun. Like, it's so iconic. It's one of those ones where, like, and they kind of remade it a few years ago, where they made this film called Sorcerer's Apprentice with Nicolas Cage. And it was basically just based on that segment of Fantasia, which was, when in the animated film, obviously he leaves Mickey alone and he puts on the hat and he casts a spell, and then the brooms. They kind of did that, but just a film based on that particular story from Fantasia. And I believe it was critically panned, although I didn't mind it. I went straight to Tina. I thought it was fine. I'll watch anything with Nicolas Cage because he's just so weird. So.
Yeah, it's a bit like Johnny Depp,
Yeah, absolutely. Like, he'll never make a normal movie. Like that's especially like, and we're going on a tangent now, but Nicolas Cage. I was talking to a friend about this a while ago because his favorite actor is Nicolas Cage, and for the last
Can I just ask you a question?
Go for it.
I'm distracted by your mattress on the wall.
Yeah.
Is that for you to bounce off because you had a bad day, or?
Yeah, I am in my office, my home office, but no. For those who don't know, because we have a very young daughter, one of us gets to sleep in the bed each night between my wife and I. The other one sleeps in the office and keeps an ear out in case Zoe wakes up. So the mattress is in here, and then we pop it down and we have a snooze. So
I was a bit worried you're going to try and sleep like that.
No, but Zoe will do that. She will run into the mattress and slide down it like she's a maniac. So
there you go. But I think there's the people who have the biggest impact on you are the people who are left side of reality.
Yep.
The creative person who that challenge your imagination and your thinking or whatever. Don't ever call me boring, even if I am. The thing is that, we were, when I look at things that I've seen or done or whatever, I've never been boring. And the thing is that you kind of gel when you see a movie with the people like Nicolas Cage or with Johnny Depp, because they add an element because that's who they are. John Belushi is a similar person. I was thinking about him after you reminded about me, and the thing is that when you have a person, I mean, regardless of any of the movies, but because of their connection with Saturday Night Live and the group of people around him, they're all the same.
Mm.
The creative people. He was the extreme of creativity because he didn't have to do much because he just used his eyes.
I always think of it's funny with Belushi because my strongest connection to him is definitely Blues Brothers, and we'll definitely talk about that a little bit later. But what I think of him most, and especially those eyes, is Animal House, which
On
is
the ladder?
the latter. Yeah, he does the eyebrow raise and dunk, dunk. There's that, or when he's in the cafeteria, he goes, "What am I? A zit." Like, I just hit the mic, so I apologize to the listeners for that one.
Oh, no. And look at the other, with the Saturday Night Live, the Bumblebee. He made something funny out of nothing. And you go back and watch the movie and you see it again. He was just, one of those people who, a short life. 1914, the airline pilot.
Oh, 1941?
41, I mean.
Yeah, Spielberg film. Yeah.
That was a little bit bizarre.
I haven't seen it. It's one of those ones.
Another one.
Yeah, I know. Well, we're going to go through your list later, and you were telling me some of the movies on your list before, and I might have already said this, but I was shocked at how many I hadn't seen. And that's something that, as people listen to this, they'll learn that I've seen a lot of films. I have a lot of movies. Like, I'm posting on Instagram all the time what I'm watching, but there's so many I haven't. And a big part of that, I think, stems to childhood. And I was thinking about this the other day when I was getting ready for tonight's episode, and so, like, even though I worked in a video store, even though I lived with with two different parents who were big film fans, there were some rules. If there was a European sounding action star in it and there was violence and cursing, chances are I wasn't going to see it till I was in my 20s. If it was Schwarzenegger, Stallone, like, none of those. I think the only Schwarzenegger film I saw while I lived under your roof was Batman and Robin, or Jingle All the Way, and anything that people actually know Schwarzenegger for I hadn't seen. I didn't see Terminator until I was in my mid-20s, which is abysmal. I'm sure people are thinking, and like, how can he call himself a film snob? But don't worry.
Well, I think, I probably, because of COVID, I've seen a lot of movies, and some of them are remarkable. Like, I sit there and I'm going, I'll turn the telly on and I'll set up Netflix and I'll put something on, and then I'll fall asleep and wake up and I go back and try and catch up so I watched the movie 35 times to get to the end of it. But there are some brilliant movies out there, and and there's a whole series of people that have got amazing skills, and a lot of women who've got just that gift of being just different enough to be able to go, it makes it worthwhile. I'm not really too much into the romantic. One I did, and this is not in my list, but one that I absolutely love. And I'll tell you why, because movies are going to have an effect on you. Sometimes because of growing up, a movie had an impact on you when you were growing up, and it's lived with you, and it's part of your psyche. But I watched a movie probably a year or so ago called Love and Other Drugs.
Yep.
And it was not because of Anne Hathaway, but it's quite possible that it was.
Well, she's great. She's one of those actresses who's just very, very versatile, and
amazing.
Doesn't matter what she's in, she always brings it. And it's funny, you touched on before female directors, and that's why. And we're certainly not going to get too preachy on this show, but that's why diversity in the arts is so important, because it's just that different point of view. Like, people are now, thanks to the show Squid Game on Netflix, people are starting to embrace Korean film. They're like, oh, South Korea, I didn't even think about that. And Parasite, which came out a couple of years ago, people are like, oh, South Korea. South Korea have been making wonderful films for the last 30 years, and people are just discovering them now. But, like, if people like Squid Game, if they like Parasite, go back and see things like Old Boy. Go back and see things like I Saw the Devil, like this and this. And here's the teenage snob coming out. Like, I'm getting patronizing. But there's some really great international film out there. Chloe Zhao, who directed The Eternals last year, she's done some really wonderful things in film as well. Drew Barrymore, she directed Whip It,
Yeah.
going on over a decade ago. It's just about all those different voices, like gives someone, every white guy, every white guy who makes a film is probably doing a pretty good job, but there's always a different point of view out there. So yes, I absolutely agree. So what do you think was the first film that really took hold of you then? What was the one where you're like, oh, this is like, it might not be a favorite film, but what was the one that changed, that kind of changed you from like, oh, I like this, I want to see more of this sort of thing? Is there one in particular you can think of?
Look, as you're growing up, there was things like Easy Rider, which once it was culturally where life was at. You know what I mean?
Of course,
So a
yeah.
lot of these things, Peter Fonda, and
Well, you think of eccentric actors, and Dennis Hopper has to spring to mind. So, like,
absolutely,
there's nothing he made that wasn't interesting. Even if you don't like the film, like, just like Nick Cage, that is an interesting guy.
Well, that's it. And you sit there and you watch it, and so they're part of that culture that when you were going through, but it's still available and you can still see it. It's probably a bit dated because it probably wasn't, the best movie in the world, but it was a movie of a time which was of importance at the time that it was made. It was because it was challenging society. We're talking about the Vietnam War time. And so one of the things about the Vietnam War, I was in, you got your balls were put into a big ball and they picked out numbers to see if you were called up.
Is this kind of the draft? Is that?
Yeah, the draft. So they didn't pick mine out, so they couldn't see me, so they missed me altogether. But a mate of mine had to go in, and the tragic part of that, it was blind as a bat, and they passed him. And he said, if I take my glasses off, I'll be going into enemy territory. And that was how good the system was. Nothing's changed. The one thing that's consistent is that the things that were issues then are issues still. And it's about power and corruption at the end of it. And we'll talk more about that later. But so when we talk about the Vietnam War, this didn't come out straight away, but it would have to be Good Morning Vietnam.
Yeah.
Because when our soldiers came back from the war, they were booed at when they came in and walked through the streets of Melbourne because they went to fight a war that no one wanted to be in. There were, when they talk about all these people walking through the streets and all sorts of stuff, there were literally tens of thousands of people walking through the streets of Melbourne that you could walk through the streets of Melbourne without being interrupted by a tram or another road being decimated by the government or the local council. And politicians were walking as well because you either went or you would have to be a conscientious objector, and that was frowned upon very badly because some people just didn't want to go to war. And it's different like World War I and World War II and the other wars in between. This is a war of no real need. It was governments who had a political agenda, and all it did will kill thousands upon thousands of Vietnamese people, and left Australians in shock and horror, who came back, and you saw that young girl, running through the streets of Vietnam naked because napalm had blown the clothes off her. The thing about
the first thing I think, and I mean, it'd be interesting to know people like the kind of this generation, like the kids of today. But I think for most people, it's the first thing you think of when someone says Vietnam War. Like, even when I was kind of 16, 17, like we didn't really study the war too closely because it just wasn't taught where I was studying. But because I was doing media studies, like they showed us photographs, and that photograph was the only one that came up.
Mm.
And it's just such like, again, like we use the word iconic, and unfortunately this one's iconic for the wrong reasons, but
Yeah.
it's the first thing you associate with that war. It's just and you see the pain and the horror in her face. And the Vietnam War, I think, has always been good subject. I mean, look, obviously it was a terrible war, but great subject matter for like a lot of people have made films about that war because it's so easy to, I suppose, expose the villainy there, like, and just show how crazy and ridiculous it was. Like, I mean, there are a million movies. I don't need to go and list them all, but you know what I mean. Like,
And the thing, because this movie was very close to what was happening in Vietnam at the time, and the Americans, when they do anything, they take over. Like, if they only needed to have the one police car, they'd have 10,000 police cars just to make a statement. And it's like Vietnam. It was all overkill, not in just the political sense. And some of those shots in those different, either the hotels or where they were blown up, was symbolic of what was really happening. And I think the fight, the battle between Robin Williams' character and the power of the government or the army,
Mhm.
and the propaganda that was going out from all sides just showed you the frustration. Real people were dying,
Mm.
and you get these things. When I was looking at movie selection, there is one thing that becomes a predominant feature of the choices that I think about, and it wasn't done deliberately. It's just the way it evolved itself. But Good Morning Vietnam is always going to be one that will always hit me because I was around at the time.
Mm.
And I know I worked in the city at the time, and this guy's son came back, and his son was useless, totally useless, and
Mm.
not in a cruel way, because what he had seen,
Yeah.
he was not able to cope with.
Yeah.
I think he ended up committing suicide. This guy was a wonderful man, but he couldn't handle his son
Yeah.
because he had gone to such a point. The people that make these decisions should never actually have any close relationship between the people who are affected by it. Not always, but mostly.
Mm.
And the decisions of others, for whatever reason, has an enormous power. And whilst I get pretty twisted about people who don't have the same respect for Anzac Day, and understanding that people gave up their lives to give us something special, and we just see it brutalised and not respected for what it was done. We don't have to respect war, but what we need to do is respect the people who gave up their lives for it. I know when Dad came back from war, he was he was in the Air Force, and he got malaria while he was away, and he would often get sick, even after all those years.
Mm.
And that was the effect of war. Um, and those things, I know your grandfather, he can tell you stories. He could have told you stories about, being on a border between one country and another country and seeing, a grenade blow up not that far away from you.
Mm.
You don't have to experience war to experience the pain of it. But like Good Morning Vietnam, you're in the middle of two sides of a story: the Vietnamese people and the children, and our own countries and their involvement. And the other thing about this, once again, is the music.
Yeah.
And the music at that time, people like the Sapphires, that the Aboriginal group that went over there and played to the soldiers, and the music at that time was a music that was unbelievable. So once again, when you start to piece together the changes in movies and in music, it all has a bearing back to something that's soul, and empathy, and tragedy and all sorts of stuff. And so that movie to me, I just love Robin Williams' total disrespect for any official trying to get him to do something, and his passion for the little Vietnamese woman that he was teaching English to. There are some really poignant parts in that movie, and I often watch it just to reflect on life sometimes, because we can often forget. But it's movies tell a story to you that are important to you at some stage. As I said, you're talking about my very first movie. Well, obviously Fantasia.
Well, there you go. I don't know if you heard that, but Zoom just told us it's 9:00, so that was a good update. This is our first time recording with Zoom, so hopefully that doesn't come into the recording. If it does, there we go.
Didn't come up here.
Oh, didn't it? So just letting me know. Well, I just broke down. There we go. Let's jump into your list. I think this is a good time to get stuck into it. Now, we did ask for 5, but I do believe you got a couple more, so that's totally fine. We'll just go through some of them. So, you mentioned Fantasia. We can start there if you like.
Well, Fantasia is it was the first. One thing about Disney cartoons were amazing. The quality of the animation was brilliant, and to know that these were hand drawn, for all the things that happen in the world now, you go back and see the graphics that were hand drawn by these people, and the technique, and the quality. I mean, you see stuff, some companies doing some Disney cartoons, and they're rubbish. The quality is appalling. But back then, where real people were doing real work and doing amazing, absolutely amazing craft, and the colour and the vibrance, but it was that combination. You had the pointed hat and the gown, of the person in charge of what was going on. A little bit Harry Potterish, but that was the thing. You saw something that was a cartoon, but the visual impact was amazing, because you had the water splashing like it was real water, and all those things were of a quality which you rarely see these days. You certainly don't see it hand done. You couldn't afford to.
There are a few. There haven't been very many hand-drawn ones in a long time. The most recent ones I can think of there was a Disney one called Princess and the Frog about 10 years ago. That was hand-drawn. It wasn't digital animation. And then recently, going back in 2018, there was a film called Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So it was an animated Spider-Man film, and it was computer-generated, except for one character. There was one character called Spider-Ham, and he's from a universe where he's a pig who dresses up as Spider-Man, and he was all hand-drawn. And they took the drawings and superimposed them on the digital one, but it is very rare. I think it's the reason why, because a lot of people talk about modern cartoons. And the popular thing is that people like to bash The Simpsons. They're like, oh, it's not as good as it was 20 years ago. Well, first of all, these ones aren't made for you. The ones from 20 years ago were made for you when you were a kid. Like, these new ones aren't made for you. But for me, the thing that I really notice is when I watch The Simpsons, the thing that really attracts me to those older episodes is the fact they were hand-drawn. Like, you can see the imperfections, you can see the smudges, you can see the trace lines, because they weren't. It's not like a Disney film where there's quite a bit of money. They were made for what they were made for, and you can see that they were made by humans. Whereas these digital ones, it's very clean. very confusing. Like, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I like, it's the same when you hear, like you were talking about music before. You listen to those old records before they did digital recording. You would hear the mistakes. If you look at movies, or like movies from that time, or even like it's not so much anymore, but even like in the 90s, before they went to digital film, you'd see the grain of the film, you'd see the scratches on the film.
Yep.
If you went to a movie theater and the film was like in its last weeks, had been playing for about a month or two, the quality was far less. It was far worse than it was the first time you saw it.
You're not wrong.
And that's and that's obviously a big part of it is nostalgia, but it gives it character. And you're talking about Fantasia, which I've already said I haven't seen, but what I think of when I think of that era of filmmaking for Disney is Sleeping Beauty, which isn't the most masculine choice of movies, but there's that gorgeous shot at the end of the film where Maleficent, the evil stepmom, whatever, turns into the dragon, and she's as big as the castle, and she's raining green fire down. And
that's where the word dragon comes from.
Oh, is it really?
No.
No, I should have said I was a teenage gullible idiot.
Grandzilla.
Yeah. The art style is gorgeous, and is that hand-drawn animation, but also it leans something I'm sure you're going to touch on, which hasn't really changed for Disney. It's always been a thing of Disney, but definitely those times is the films were scary.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like kids' films these days, might have a little bit to scare children because it's an important lesson to learn. But those, for those 50s and 60s ones in particular, like up until let's be honest, the 2000s really, like until things got a little bit more sanitized. Like those Disney films in particular were scary. Like they dealt with subject matter like death. Like it's pretty full on. And Fantasia, I know, is a renowned for scaring many a child because it is so weird.
I think the closest thing to Fantasia would be let me think. I've got to think this through. Tubular Bells. What was it called? What was the movie?
The Exorcist?
The Exorcist. Because The Exorcist was quite violent. The send-up one was quite good.
What's it called? Repossessed? With Linda Blair from The Exorcist? Yeah.
The Exorcist as a movie was scary. I remember when I watched it when it first came out, I stayed in the house with the lights on.
It still works. I watched that movie not last year, but the year before. After Zoe was born, there was this kind of long period of time where we were rotating sleep shifts. So I would sleep till 3 a.m, so I just watch movies. And I rewatched The Exorcist one of those nights. She was asleep next to me. Like Zoe's asleep in the crib, and I put The Exorcist on, just so people know what kind of father I truly am. And there's that shot, and in the dark, and then like the face comes out, and it's the paint and the pointed teeth. And like by today's standards, it's nothing, but it still is so effective. And then obviously there's the spider walk, there's the pea soup. And
it's one of those things, just the impact that it can have. So from not so much the violence point of view, just the visual impact of what they created was exactly like Fantasia. It was all in the mind that God's working on, and Fantasia it was still scary. Just like The Exorcist, just a different era. And so when you're looking at movies, so The Exorcist had a huge impact on me, from the point of view that it was probably one of the most scariest movies I've ever watched. And I'm not into scary movies, because I grew up with a lot of scary people, and so I didn't need to see a movie. Didn't need to see a movie to prove it. One movie which I actually rewatched today, which is very unusual for me, not to rewatch a movie, but because the impact of this movie um, uh, is a little bit about what some movies are like. You know, you empathise with what's going on, because this is was based on a true story, and it's called Brubaker, and this is a prison run by corrupt officials
Mhm.
and corrupt businesses, and nothing's much changed. Um, and and what you've got is a prison system that is exploiting the prisoners to make money and deprive them of living in conditions that were suitable, while making money selling food that they had for the prisoners to supermarkets. So
Mm.
they were making money. So from the government officials who were aware of it, for the board of people in charge of the prison officers, and businesses in the local area who were benefiting from getting equipment paid for by the prison to do prison work and given to other businesses to save the money. This is based on a true story. So
Mm.
when you're thinking about this, a lot of prisoners would have been people of colour. Um, and as this goes, um, Robert Redford, who plays the warden, um, after they put him into the prison system as a person who is a prisoner. Someone's got him in there, they want to see what's going on. And then eventually he's taken and he's starting to run the prison. Every door that he goes to, there are either government officials blocking him or people who are in prison who've got duties of authority blocking him. And even the person who's trying to get him to get the changes done is not corrupt, but she's not going the extra bit to make it happen.
Mm.
So he's battling all this, and in the meantime, he's actually found a person in the system who's been in jail for longer than his sentence,
Yeah.
but they just left him there because they forgot about him.
That sounds a
And that
little
happened,
bit, and
happened
we were talking about this before the show, but this sounds a little bit Shawshanky, um,
exactly.
where you have the character actually, and it's the same. You know, Morgan Freeman's in both these films. I haven't seen Brubaker,
Yeah.
but I did a bit of research before we started, and Morgan Freeman's in both, and you know he plays Red in Shawshank, who keeps getting denied parole again and again. Yeah,
And,
sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
no, that's okay. Because I was going to talk about Shawshank, and I thought, you know what? Everyone knows, well, most all the people know about Shawshank. But this one, um, even when he was uncovering things, they kept on bringing it back to him. They tried to get rid of him. In fact, he left
Hmm.
eventually. But what was happening? The guy that was in jail for longer than he should have been was actually the guy that made the coffins for the people that the officials murdered.
Oh wow.
So the officials were murdering people, and then they buried them in a field. And he knew they were there somewhere because this guy had told them. But they actually murdered the coffin maker because they didn't want him to tell them what was going on. So the best way to do it is they put him up into one of those hand charged electric charges and killed him.
Hmm.
So Brubaker then goes into the fields and he gets all these guys to dig up the fields, and eventually they uncover all these coffins. And they want to deny, they said they were old coffins and whatever, but there was bodies that were broken, they were beaten to death. And eventually, you know, the system didn't change, and he left. But as he was leaving, all the prisoners were applauding him for what he had done, because what he had done, he stopped it. He stopped what was going on, but he couldn't do any more there because the people in the system, they had to get rid of them all. He just didn't want to be part of it because the people were as corrupt. Even this woman who got him in there. But when you see this is a true story, or based on a true story, um, nothing's changed in the world.
Mm.
You know, wherever there is power, there's corruption, and it doesn't matter how that goes. But when innocent people die because of it, that's when it's cruel. And you sit there, and I remember when I saw this movie for the first time, it affected me amazingly.
Mm.
I was really shattered by this thought, knowing that was a true story or based on a true story, and that people were murdered and put in there by officials. Now, I can get a little bit crazy from time to time, James, and and sometimes I've just got to go off Facebook because if I look at anything on Facebook that comes from America, you just sit there and you get violently ill by the amount of people are murdered by police, and they don't do 1 day of jail, and it's mostly it's people of colour, and they don't have their information. They're not properly trained. And then the government stands by them, and they get off. And you sit there, how does this happen? And the thing that really annoys me about that, which is exactly the way Brubaker, is that you've got government and you've got politicians and you've got lawmakers approving murder of citizens by police by the mere fact that none of these police get charged with it.
Mm.
And you sit back and you're thinking, America's learnt nothing. They've learnt nothing. And it doesn't matter. But from my point of view, if people get shot in the street, there's a 14-year-old boy, an 8-year-old girl who got shot in the back 5 times. It was a mistake. Well, she won't be coming back.
Mm.
You know, and there's no, you know, they go to court. It was like the Australian who was shot by a policeman, the young lady who was engaged to a man in America, and she came out in her pajamas because she thought she heard something, so the policeman shot her. And he's out now. He was only in there for about 3 weeks, and he got out. You know, and so when movies imitate reality, then the world's really in a bad place.
Well, there's it's interesting you say this because there's one I'm thinking of right now that really affected me, and obviously, and you talk about people of color, and the Black Lives Matter movement, obviously, in the last couple of years has really been a huge focus and has been achieving a lot of wonderful things, you know, to get their voices heard. And there's a movie that came out back in 2018 called Black Klansman. I don't know if you've seen this one. A Spike Lee film, based on the true story about an African American cop who went undercover into the KKK. But he couldn't, obviously, being an African American man, he couldn't blend in. So he teamed up with a Jewish man, a Jewish police officer. And I only talk about his religion because it's important to the story, because obviously the KKK hate everyone. And so this Jewish cop went undercover, but all the phone calls were done between this African American cop and the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, and then and then took him down. Which is really great movie. If you haven't seen it, it's amazing. But the thing that affected me is at the end of the film, they show footage from the riots when the guy drove the car through and ran over the protests and stuff. And I've seen the movie twice, and it's a very entertaining movie. It's very funny to see dumb, hateful people get what they deserve. But that footage I'd never seen before, and following the power of that film, I can't help but burst into tears. Both times I've seen it, as soon as that footage comes up, it just destroys you because of what's going on over there at the moment, and has been going on over there forever. But all that aside, it is a wonderful movie. You should definitely see Black Klansman. It's really good.
If these were coming from China, everyone would be going after China for the behaviour of killing people and and it's a bit like it's just the fact that some countries will be highlighted by the things that they do, and other countries it just doesn't matter. And in America, it doesn't matter. And Black Lives Matter. It was never about form, and it was about um, the instantaneous outroar from people of all colour
Mm.
about what happened. It wasn't that one person; it's all the people before it that created the thrust. And you don't want to see violence in your street. You don't want to see buildings being burnt down or whatever. But the government, the country, caused it
Mm.
because they've never addressed it, and they're still not addressing it.
Yeah.
And, I so
I sure hope your next movie is a fun one.
well, well, look.
No, I'm not. I'm just being silly. Like it's good. Like
Yeah.
that's the beauty. Like it's funny. Like there have been times when I've sat back and I look at my collection or I think about what I've done. I'm like, is this a fruitless pursuit? Like, is there more I could be doing? Like, what is it about film that I hold so dearly? Why movies? Like, because a lot of people are just like, I need to sit and watch TV all day, and A, I don't. I work very hard, but B, it's so much more than that. Like, people often write it off as frivolous art, just like, oh, something to disengage, and absolutely it can be, and we talked about that, but it's just there's no simple way for me to explain it. It connects with me in a way that other things in this world haven't. Like film unlocks something inside me where I develop that emotional connection, or I learn, or I get an insight into the human condition that you don't get in everyday life. So even though I did say it'd be nice if you had a fun one next, like
Well,
I'm not discounting any of these films. Like
the one that two movies stick out to me. One's a fun movie, but it's very sad, which is Mrs. Doubtfire.
mm,
An amazing movie, and if anyone's gone through divorce or separation, this is not one that you want to watch more than 20 times.
definitely the
Great
first time I saw it was after my own parents' divorce. That was the first time I watched Mrs. Doubtfire, and probably not the
Yeah,
best choice, but anyway.
it's I've seen it several times. And what this movie to me is about is, and it happens in Australia, it's how the legal system can destroy everything by some judge, and it happens in the family law court in Australia, where a judge will make a decision that affects the kids more than affects the parents.
Mm,
The kids are the recipient of pain, and we've seen it time and time again where someone has made a decision to the father, and then he's showing his kids over the Westgate Bridge,
mm.
or driven into a pond with the kids so that the wife doesn't get to see the kids anymore. And I didn't mean that to be for reflection, but if you see the issues that Mrs. Doubtfire has to contend with because A, he didn't have a job, or B, he made a mistake or whatever, the human frailties of people become the issue, or a smart lawyer who plays tricks with the judge. There's always got to be protection for people, but they've got to have people that actually got some respect, and that doesn't happen in that situation. The family law court has always and always will, until they actually change it, needs to change the philosophy about how they give kids the right to be where they need to be.
It is definitely changing. Like I know, like that's one thing I will say, and I love this movie as well. It is a very funny movie, and obviously Robin Williams' genius is undeniable, and the message at the end of the film I think is very poignant and beautiful. But I do think it does sit in that it's not outdated, but it is a product of its time. I think now, just from my own experience as an adult and interacting with people, very much in the 90s and earlier, it was like mum gets the kids. Like that's just what it was. Although like our family was a bit of a mold breaker there. It was a bit of pretty even split, a little bit more dad than mum, but it was a relatively even split. And it seems to now the interest of the children does seem to be changing. I'm not pretending that I understand anything about the legal system or divorce court, but just from what I've seen in my own everyday life. But yeah, like it was very interesting, that film, that they did. And I don't want to, I'm no historian, and maybe there are other films before it, but it feels like the first time that it was like, hey, what about if dad wants custody? Like generally in movies, mum always wanted custody anyway, or dad was a drunk or violent, or and that sort of thing, which, as we know, is great in film, but not always the case. And also the roles can reverse as well. But very, very interesting to see that, put on screen. Like dad wants his kids. They do it a lot more. Like the other one I think of, which is a weird one to reference, is Ant-Man. I don't know if you ever watched Ant-Man with Paul Rudd, but he is an ex-convict, and he's just trying to earn the he wants to see his daughter again, and ends up going on a heist and becoming a superhero and all sorts of things. And his ex-wife's new boyfriend is the cop chasing him. Yeah. But the way that story has progressed in the sequel, and then there's a new one coming out soon, is that the new family that is now not his family, so his ex-wife, his daughter, and his ex-wife's new boyfriend or husband are very embracing and supportive of him, where it's like, look, you might not be married to your wife anymore, but we still accept you for who you are, and we want to support you where we can. It's very interesting. It's very, very forward-thinking and modern, which I really enjoyed about that film. But anyway, sorry, I got distracted.
The other thing about Mrs. Doubtfire was that if you took it a little bit out of its covering, it was about a person who's able to recreate himself in the disguise of someone else, and see what he actually could do when he wasn't the person that everyone knew. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, the fact that he was sitting there drinking whiskies with the producer of a show, I just loved it the way that he actually got stuck into the guy that was sitting on his ex-wife, in the restaurant.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm still really about that. It will forever be in my memory. But on a lighter note, I said to you earlier, we really are, growing up, and we bring on board not only our experiences, but we all, our age bracket. What do you do at this age? What are you doing? What are your connections? And I told you about the band and Masters Apprentices. That's like a dream. You have a bit of fun and all sorts of stuff, and then you go to Sunbury Rock concert, and those bare boobs come out again. Everyone's walking around with bare boobs. I didn't have any, so I couldn't bear them. But that takes me to the movie with Matthew Broderick. And one of the classics on so many levels, and that was Ferris Bueller's Day Out. Bueller. There were so many things that, in some instances, many people growing up at that era will have done something like that during their school years, and trying not to go to school by being sick, and fudging things, writing your own prescription or writing your own, dear teacher, by writing and then signing it your own name. There were so many things. But that movie, those three characters were, because of their individuality, they were key in the whole movie, no more than the red car.
The red Cameron's dad's car, yeah.
Cameron's dad's car, the one they're trying to reverse.
Roll the miles back.
Roll the miles back. But it was like all the people who used to help him to get out of trouble, and everyone believed him. Bueller, he was just the most believable character, and they all loved him except his sister, and she was always getting in trouble. There's always one person in the family.
Was hooking up with Charlie Sheen in prison.
Charlie Sheen. there you go. And that was a bad choice. If she got end up with Charlie Sheen, woof. But that was one of those movies at a time where it was really just having a poke of fun at everything about growing up.
It really is. It's so quotable. It's so memorable. I always think, obviously, the parade scene stands out, where he jumps on the float and starts singing Dunkirk. Um, uh, and obviously, the inflatable body underneath the blanket, and how to fake being sick, you lick your palms. One thing I always thought was weird, even as a kid, and I just didn't know like how to bring. I didn't even know how to confront it. There's a moment very early on in the film when he goes to get Sloane out of school. Because he'd already spoken to Cameron, and he wants to get his girlfriend. He calls the school, pretends to be Sloane's father, and he stands at the front of the school in like the jacket and hat, and then makes out with her. But they think that it's her dad. It's so weird. It's such a weird choice.
Yeah. It was. It's. I don't know whether it's even dated. You know, you could see parts are.
It's interesting. We watched it a few years ago. Tina had never seen it before. And I've learned over the course of our relationship that Tina doesn't like John Hughes films. She thinks she does, but she doesn't. With the exception of maybe Home Alone. But like Breakfast Club, 16 Candles, Ferris Bueller, all those ones she just has trouble with. And we watched Ferris Bueller, and I love it. I think it's great as well. And I said to her after, I was like, "What do you think?" She's like, "Oh, I didn't like it. I just don't like him." And I was trying to figure out what it was, and I realized what it was. If you watch Ferris Bueller as a kid or as a teenager, you love Ferris Bueller. He's the ultimate rebel. He's the ultimate everyman. He's the guy who's going to pull the tricks on the adults and make it work. If you watch it as an adult, if you watch it in your 30s, especially if you are a teacher, you're just like, I hate this kid. Like, he's such a smart aleck. Like, he's so annoying. He's like making things difficult for all the adults. He's very selfish. So I think it's one of those things where if you watch as a kid, he's your hero for life. Like even now, like even when I think about him, like he is great. But she was in her late 20s, early 30s. She'd been teaching for a decade, and she was like, "Why do people like this kid? He's so rude and obnoxious." Like,
it's funny, isn't it? Like when I think of that. I also think of the Millers.
We're the Millers.
We're the Millers with Jennifer Aniston and I can't think the
Jason Sudeikis, the man, like the dad. Is that who you're talking about?
No, the younger one.
Oh, Will Poulter with the eyebrows.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a fantastic actor. He's he's great.
When he broke into the rap, you know.
Yeah.
So many parts about that movie, often inappropriate, but just very clever writing.
It's a very underrated film, We're the Millers. Like, it's one of those ones, and I think that as back when I was a kid, and certainly before I was even born, like there weren't a lot of films out. Like, there were a lot of films, but it was like, here's 2 movies, in the theater for a couple of months. Whereas now, like, there's movies, like there's 6 new movies every week, even during COVID. And that's just in theaters. And if you go online, it's like, here are 20 new movies, and like you've never heard of them, you don't know the actors, and that's fine. But because there's so many genres and subgenres, it just goes out, and everyone's got an opinion now. So like the comedies, I'm not surprised the comedy has survived this long. But you look at the comedies of the 80s, you look at anything with Bill Murray or John Belushi, like, they wouldn't be able to make those films these days, first of all. And maybe rightly so. Like, I watched a few of those over the last 2 years, and I was shocked at how much they got away with, particularly Animal House. Like, they get away with a lot of stuff in that. But also, it's just there's so much out there now. Like, that means there's so much more competition. And people are very easy to write off something like Where the Mills is the perfect example of that, where people are just like, like, it's a cheesy comedy. It's kind of fun. Like, it's really fun, and like that's I think what a lot of people like. People think of these classic comedies and hold them in high esteem, and like every comedy should be like this. But it's like, no. Like, it's cool if it's not like that. I don't mind that. Like, it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be highly revered for the next 10 years. It can just be a good time while you're at the movies. Another one I think of in that vein is Mike and Dave Need Wedding Dates. I don't know if you ever saw that one, but it was based on a true story, actually. Two brothers in a relatively wealthy family who their sister's getting married. They need to get wedding dates, but they always pick the worst girls who because they're rich, they're party animals and stuff. So they put out an ad on Craigslist online saying, "We're looking for wedding dates. We're looking for nice girls." And these two girls rock up and they pretend to be nice, but they're the worst girls you've ever met in your life. And they almost ruin the wedding at like this island wedding. It's really, really funny. But that's just another one of those films where people are like, it's fine. Like, it's not The Hangover. Well, nothing's going to be The Hangover. Do you know what I mean? Like, The Hangover is The Hangover. Nothing's going to come close to that. Let it be its own thing.
The and comedies, when you talk about John Belushi and Animal House, I mean,
there you go. I'm not lying. I'm a fan. There it is. We're the Millers on Blu-ray.
I mean, what was the girl's name?
The young girl. That's Emma Roberts. That is Julia Roberts' niece.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Very good.
She's great.
Very good.
She's I'm a big fan of Emma Roberts. She makes some really interesting decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, and she had a good role in that movie. The Saturday Night Live had such a big impact on people in my vintage, and I know you like Saturday Night Live. And that core group of people who were there was always, I think, I've told you or shown you, there's a video clip of John Belushi going around a graveyard.
You can't forget it. He's the only one.
He's the only one that died, and he was going to all the grave sites of people who in his ideas had died before him. And that was spooky.
Well, I think most of them. Gilda obviously passed away, but most of them are still around. Like Chevy's still going. And I know people don't. I know people don't like Chevy Chase. Like, I know that he's one of those people who is famously not a nice person to work with, but he's still good. Like I rewatch Community all the time, and he's funny. Like,
well, that's right. You forget about those recent events. You think Community is one of those ones where he takes a good role in it, doesn't he?
I think they were like, look, let's just write Chevy Chase. Like, I think that the character's very close to the person, but it just works. Aykroyd. I mean, I'm a bit disillusioned with Dan Aykroyd these days because all he tries to do is sell vodka. I was listening to an interview with him recently. I had to turn it off. He was so obnoxious. But there's that new Ghostbusters film. He's meant to be in it. I'll check it out. Like, yeah.
When you talk about, there was, we're talking about the Bumblebee and the different things that John Belushi did, and a lot of people probably wouldn't believe it, but every sketch that he did, or anything that he did himself. He did all. Particularly, I did cartwheels and backflips and all that, and he actually did them. He wasn't built for speed. He'd be a good battering ram, but the Blues Brothers is one of those iconic movies where there's just so many different parts of it. You've got, the nun who keeps on slapping her over his knuckles because he's behaving, and they're trying to save the orphanage, and she's trying to get him into to behave. But everything that it's one of those situations. I mean, they get into all those amazing, car chases, in the park where there's the rally going on. And who was the guy that was a little protester? I have a funny feeling he was. It'll come to me. He was in. This is Sarah would love this. He was the one that was in, and I can't remember. But you were talking about the last scene, but when they were playing on the show and they were all running late, they couldn't get into the theatre, and because it was blocked off by all the police. You know, they're
Mm.
getting their way through the tunnels in the car, and they get on stage and they get the money, and then they take it up to the to pay and all the. But there's always a police chase.
Well, yeah, and it held the record. I don't know. I think the record might have been beaten now, but for the longest time, for like 30 years almost,
Yeah.
um, most cars destroyed in a car chase in the
Oh, that
movie.
guy's name was Henry Gibson.
Okay.
He was in. They used to have a TV show, which was once again I'm going to forget. It was one of those things where people used to come out of a hole on a wall and make a comment. And Goldie Hawn was in it, and a few others. It'll come to me eventually, but yeah, the car chases were unbelievable.
Mm.
And there was hardly a scene in the whole movie, and they always had what kind of car? What was their
Cadillac.
car? Cadillac,
Mm.
And when he came out of Juliet, there it is, Black
Well,
Beast.
thank you, pal. My brother picks me up in a police car. You don't like it? Okay. It's I've seen that movie so many times, and I posted
Yeah,
about it this morning. Like, it's the first film I remember watching, and I'm sure I watched movies before that. I'm sure I watched like a Disney cartoon or something,
yeah,
but it's the one I remember watching the most,
yeah,
all the time. Like, it feels like religiously, and like we wore the tape out. We wore the tape out because the opening credits you didn't see, like that you had to do the tracking on the
mm,
VHS because they didn't have a crisp image. You had to do tracking to clear it, and we couldn't get the tracking to work through the overhead shots of Chicago. Like, it wasn't
mm,
until pretty much he arrived at the front gates of the prison out of Joliet that the video started working because we watched it so many times, and it was
yeah.
so heavily censored. I had no idea because in those days it is very different now. Like, they censored everything on TV. So the first time I watched it as like a 15-year-old on DVD, I was like, this film has swearing in it. I was like, this film has
Well, that's the
Nazis in
thing.
it.
Is that when you see things, and if you go back to the 80s once again, and on TV, there was more nudity on TV in those days than you'll ever see now.
Mm,
What they could get away with at 8 o'clock at night or 8:30 at night, you wouldn't see at the beach, and or maybe you would. But the thing is that, and language, yeah, you didn't know there was any language because it was all deleted
mm.
until you get the video, and then you go started watching it and go, I don't remember that. I don't remember
Yeah, I
that.
remember I watched it. I was like, we used to watch these kids all the time. How do I not remember this? And it's because the VHS was so censored. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and also,
But that
the
was
VHS had those scenes deleted. Like, until I was 15, I had no idea that we saw Elwood quit his job. He's not
yeah,
wearing a suit and sunglasses. He's wearing like goggles and a white shirt, and he's got his hair up all over the place. And this was years before I'd seen Ghostbusters, so I didn't know what Dan Aykroyd looked like without the glasses. So in that whole film, you like, as far as I knew, you never saw his face. You only ever saw him in sunglasses. It wasn't until years later I saw that scene that had been put back in. Um, yeah.
yeah. But like John Belushi was, it was a tragic because the movies he was in always had an impact on you
Mm,
because he was very quick. And as we've discussed, he's one of those guys that his eyes do all the talking. You know, you watch him and he's making a statement, um, and that truly is it's a iconic uh, comedy culture.
mm.
Uh, Nothing quite like it ever since, and never likely. Even when they made the movie, the Blues Brothers with what was his name?
Blues Brothers 2000 with John Candy. Oh, not John
Uh,
Candy. John Goodman.
Goodman. It didn't
Mm.
quite reach the anywhere near the heights of.
Well, I haven't watched it in years. I watched it as a kid and remember loving it because it was Blues Brothers. And the last
Yeah,
time I probably saw it was probably before my 20s, maybe at the latest, very early 20s. I'm really
yeah,
worried to watch it now because it's critically panned online. Like, no one likes it. People think it's a
yeah,
cash grab, and like, the music's great. Like, that soundtrack is really good.
yeah,
For
yeah.
obviously nothing touches the first one, but the second soundtrack's really good as well for the most part. But I just um there's zombies in it. There's a voodoo curse.
Oh yeah.
There's skeletons in the sky. I just don't know whether it's gonna hold up the way it did when I was 10 years old.
When you go back to the first one and you think about who was in it and how many musicians were in it, like world-class musicians in this comedy, and they all the soundtrack was basically the who's of Motown in so many ways.
That's one thing they did really well with the sequel is they got the people who couldn't get to the first one into the second one. You got Eric Clapton, you've got B.B. King, you've got Paul Schaefer, you've got all these people. So they did make up, that part of it. It's just actually the second movie does have one of my favorite jokes out of both movies. The second movie does have one of my favorite jokes.
You broke my watch.
No, that's the first one. Although they do it in the second one in Russian.
Yeah.
But in the second movie, there's a joke where the car breaks down. They're on their way to the Battle of the Bands, and the car breaks down, and they're like, "Well, what do we do now?" And Elwood goes, "We start walking," and no one wants to follow him, and he's walking off into the sunset by himself. And he turns around. He gives this great speech. He's like listing all these famous musicians. And he's like, Little Walter, Big Walter, just gives all these names. And then he goes, and Robert K. Weiss. And Donald Duck Dunn goes, who the hell is Robert K. Weiss? Robert K. Weiss produced the movie. He's in the credits. He's one of the guys in the movie. And I thought that was such a great joke. Because it's he's not some blues legend. He's literally just one of the guys who paid for the movie to get made. And if you don't know it, it means nothing. But it's such a great little joke. It's one of my favorite ones in that movie, even though that movie's not very good.
Correct. Another movie.
Go for it.
Billy Connolly.
I know this movie. I know which movie you're going to talk about. And now, growing up, I was led to believe you weren't the world's biggest Billy Connolly fan. Is that true? And because I know he was very blue, and that's something that you didn't like. So were you not a fan of his at all, really? Or did you always kind of like him? Or has this film kind of turned you around on him?
I probably... I would make assumptions about certain things for various reasons. I wasn't really big on blue language, and he can't help himself. And over the years, I've heard him do other humour, and I think as he's got older, he's sort of mellowed as well. But this particular movie is a gem. Because it's sort of, when you get older...
This one, What We Did on Our Holiday?
What We Did on Our Holiday, very good, James.
Got it.
And is it David Tennant?
David Tennant, Rosamund Pike. So those are the three main adult leads, and then there's three children who I can't remember, but the three children in this film are brilliant.
Yeah. It starts on the premises of a family breaking up, or husband and wife breaking up, and they're going on a holiday to a dysfunctional family event, which is chaotic in every sense of the word, and the grandfather decides he wants to go for a walk, and takes the kids with him, and that becomes the story, in essence, because and there's some beautiful things that come out of that part where he knows he's getting old and he knows he's not in good health. And then he has this vision of sailing out on a raft and burning and moving on to another life or the afterlife. And so when that actually happens and then they go up and tell the parents, this is what happened to Grandpa, it all starts to cut loose.
So just to clear up for people listening, just in case you missed that, Billy Connolly plays a grandfather I think he has cancer, and he's decided to stop treatment. He's like, I don't want to. He's like, I've got whatever time I got left. I don't want to spend it throwing up. I just want to live my life with my grandkids. And he tells his grandson, who's obsessed with Vikings, give me a Viking funeral. Put me on a raft, burn me out at sea. And then in the film, and this is a huge spoiler, but it's also an 8-year-old movie. So if you haven't seen it, get onto it. He passes away like while they're at the beach. And the funny thing is, the first time, like they think he's dead and he's playing a trick on them, so they're like, "Oh, he's just messing around," and then he actually does die. And the kids are like, "Well, let's build a raft, let's light him on fire, and send him out to sea." And that's at the midway point in the film, and then it does unravel. I never hear anyone talk about this film. This is a film that I bring to people. Like I showed it to Tina last year, I think, or maybe the year before. I showed it to Mum. I might have kind of steered you in this direction as well. I don't know, but it's just one of those movies that this time I saw, I was like, this is incredible. It's just so. It's a little Scottish film. It's so well made. The ending of that movie is so poignant and beautiful, where because there's this media circus, of course, where like they find out these three kids burnt their grandfather alive, and the media, and at one point, like David Tennant, who plays the dad, steps out to protect his children, be like, look, they didn't know what they were doing, and even though he's going through this breakup, and his wife's about to move away and take the kids, and it's going to be like a 3-hour bus ride or whatever. When she comes out in solidarity with him to protect like their children, like it just tears you apart. It's so beautiful. It's a wonderful movie. Yeah, sorry, I definitely took over there, but I love the movie.
No, that's okay. It is a wonderful movie, and I think you can't undersell that conversation that Billy Connolly is having about the Viking and what's important at that age of life. And unless you get to that age of life, and the machinations of an older person, and I don't know too many older people who don't have. As you get older, you don't give a rat's about people too much anymore. You don't have to put up with their nonsense. You don't need to be putting up with their approval. Get lost. Get lost. You don't like me. I don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
I have not 1 ounce of passion about people who want to judge me for what I am, because what I am is real, and what you see is what you get. But the thing is that in saying that, I'm noticing my mum that the barriers came down in her life as she got older, and she was more accepting, or more, you could have a bit more of a laugh at things. And most of the time when she's being serious, I spent most of my life serious. And I say to myself, are you serious? And I go, you've got to be joking. And I think that I relate to this movie on the basis of he's come to the point where he's accepted who he is and what's going on, and just enjoy. And that's the beauty. This movie is one that should be watched by the whole family.
It's really good, and it
is.
Again, we were talking before about Disney films and how they deal with tough subject matter. I was shocked, and like not outraged, but just I was so surprised that a family movie made in Scotland in 2014 that no one really heard of, decided to like, hey, we're going to make a movie about a granddad who dies on the beach and his kids are stuck at the beach. 'Cause that's the other thing. There's no other adults. They're isolated. They have to find a way to get home. And so they're going to deal with death. They're going to process the idea of death, and at the same time, they're going to burn him. They're going to burn him on a raft and send him out to sea. And it's just so crazy that they made it about it, but it works. And it's it's one that I recommend again and again. Like I can't recommend enough. It's one of my favorite movies of that year, and maybe of the decade as well. It's so good.
Yeah, I think the characters, the people playing those parts, bring it to life.
Yeah.
And because Billy Connolly's got there's a uniqueness about him. He lives in his own spirit. He's an older man, long hair, hippie type attitude, and that's beautiful. He's not wearing a suit. He's not doing anything dumb. He just looks at life and appreciates what that is. And he talks to the kids in a fun way.
Yeah, he doesn't talk down to them. He's just
Yeah. So I agree with you. If there's a movie that should be watched, this is the one, hands down. that it's got that, the key elements, family breakup, and all that's good about that. I had another one. I was going to talk about Gandhi, but it takes too long. And as I told you before, I've got to turn the heater on before I can talk about that. But that's a great movie. Soylent Green. It's one of those movies that you need to have been there in a bit. Dark Knight was another movie. There is so many movies that.
That was one, and we won't talk about it because we'll wind it down. And look, you'll be on again, so you can talk anything we missed this time. We'll talk about it next time. But Dark Knight being on your list, I mean, it's funny because what we did on our holiday is newer than the Dark Knight, but it makes sense. Hearing the Dark Knight was on your list kind of surprised me. I was like, wow, like there's a Batman movie on Dad's list. Although now that I think about it, when I was a kid, I remember you renting Batman from the video store, and I wasn't allowed to watch it. I was too young, and those first couple of Batman movies are very dark, and like to be fair, Dark Knight's very dark as well. But those first ones are very creepy dark. And I remember you renting. I was like, my parents watch Batman. My parents watch Dracula. Like I remember seeing some videos that I wasn't allowed to watch. You guys at home. I'm like, my parents like this stuff. That's cool.
You probably don't know, but I've actually seen the whole Harry Potter series.
No, I know this. Well, you would have seen most of them with me because up until I started dating Tina, because obviously, for those who don't know, Tina's a huge Harry Potter fan, and she'll definitely talk about it on her. It was on her episode. But up until we started dating, we saw them all the time. And then I know, I think it was during COVID, Sarah said that you guys had rewatched them. So.
Oh yeah, because I forgot. I think there's portions of my life just I don't remember. I decided not to include them in my history or whatever. But I think COVID certainly opened up the doors. I've seen, we've talked at your house, some of the things, either series or stuff that I've watched. And I know Tina and I have a chat every now and then, have you seen this or you've seen that? And there's some great Pommy dramas out at Broadchurch, which is an amazing series, but they go on and on and on. And then, of course, I was taking Sarah to work this morning, and there was Sean, the guy, the comedian in England who died recently.
Oh, Sean Locke. Oh, yeah.
Sean Locke.
What a loss. He was
a genius.
Yeah.
Genius. And he was reading out of his book, and Sarah was killing herself laughing because, there's very few people that quick, that clever to be able to do what he does. And, it comes up on Facebook all the time and, or TikTok, I'll bring out an excerpt and that's it. He's just, it is a sad luck and a tragedy because there's no one quite like him.
Yeah, and I never saw any. I've still never seen any of his stand up, but just the things he would say on those panel shows, just some stuff he got away with as well, but just very, very funny, very sharp witted.
There's a whole group of people that come from that show that end up being on other shows, and they're always good because half of the group that's come from that are on this new show.
That's what I love about British comedians and British panel shows. It's a very small but tight knit group, so you generally get the same people. So you get to see that banter, and every now and then a newcomer will show up. But generally, we've talked about off air Taskmaster, which is one of my favorite shows, which you can watch on Binge now. And it's the same thing. Like you get to see this getting those comedians in a room and getting them to clash with each other, and it's so good. We'll wind it down.
Some of the women in that group are hilarious.
Oh yeah,
absolutely hilarious, and it's just a pleasure to see people do what they do so well. And you can just sit there and love. Good way to start the day. If you want to have a good laugh, turn those guys on in the morning, and good way to start the day.
Yeah, it's definitely one thing that Australian TV is lacking, which is panel shows. And we also don't, look at the risk of alienating the entire audience. We don't have a great sampling of comedians. There's some very good Australian comedians, but it's very hit and miss. I find like there are a few that I like, but there are a lot in there who don't really bring much to my personal tastes. But yeah, it's a shame.
I
That
think
was the one thing I loved when I was over in the UK was those panel shows. Just watching, like you just like for 3 hours, like back to back to back, like panel shows with all those great comedians.
we've gone backwards in everything in Australia. We don't have any live TV anymore. We don't have any comedy shows anymore. You go back, 15, 20 years, and you had Steve Vizard show.
Mm.
You had there was another one I can't remember. It's the 9 o'clock news, but there's a whole range of comedy shows. You've got nothing, and it's almost like we'll just buy rubbish from overseas, or we'll produce our own rubbish, and that's all you're going to get because that's all we can do. And to the ABC and to the BBC's credit and Channel 4, they've actually kept it going, and to hang with the expense. My last comment: Billy Connolly. Go and see it. Go and see it.
Well, before we wind down, we do end every episode with a rapid fire question. So we've got 5 questions.
Oh, okay.
5 or 6 questions for you, so you don't have to think about them too much. This one should be easy because I think we talked about it already. What was the last thing you watched?
Oh, well, that would have been Brubaker today.
Yeah, I thought so. And and we've all got one. What's been sitting on your watch list forever? What do you keep putting off watching?
Well, that's a good question. Oh, I've seen. I'm getting better. I've been pretty ordinary in this area. What's the last movie I watched? I can't remember. I'll have to come back to that one.
That's okay. Are you a movie crier?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's where I get it from then.
Yeah.
Is there an actor or actress that you'll follow to any movie? Doesn't matter what the movie is, you see there's an actor or actress you'll follow everywhere?
Well, John Belushi would be that. Whatever John Belushi was in, I'd watch because that was just the nature of it, whether it was a movie or whatever. And you do, if there's somewhere where you're actually, if I'm now the guy from Western Australia who did that lovely song on the Pope, not the Pope.
Tim Minchin?
Tim Minchin.
Yeah.
I'd go and see him in a minute if he came back on stage. So, there are people who I probably in the past may not have been encouraged to do, but now, over a period of time, I've got into their sense of humour, and it's a sense of humour I need.
Nice one. What was the worst movie you ever saw?
Oh. Well, it'll have to be an Australian one.
It's interesting you say that. I get in this conversation all the time. I'm not a huge fan of Australian movies. Like there are a few that I really do like, but I just think we could do better.
Yeah, I think you talked about Jackie Weaver. She's actually got better as she's got older. They've given her movies that she actually deserves, rather than drop your boob out movies because that's all she ever did. But I think that there's what happens is it's a bit like the Underbelly series. The Underbelly series was great when it first came out. And the one with Matthew Newton is probably the best.
It's really good.
Yeah, he played an enormous character. It was really, really good. But the first one was good because it was new.
Yeah.
But I think Vince Colosimo, unfortunately, took the character role far too far, and now he's in trouble. But then they started to try and milk it, and I think when they do that, no more.
Okay.
That's it.
All right. Last question. What movie should they never remake?
Well, that's an interesting question because some movies, they do remake them and they're a disaster. I've seen Gone with the Wind, and the only thing it gave me was wind. You know what I mean? It was. I don't know what they see in it. Do you know what? Am I missing the point? Have you seen Gone with the Wind?
I haven't, and the reason I haven't seen it is the runtime.
Yeah.
3.5 to 4 hours. It's if there are classics on the list that I haven't seen, it's not because I don't want to watch them with the quality. It's about time. It's why
Yeah.
like I didn't watch Ben Hur for the long. Like Ben Hur, I had to watch in 4 sittings because it was like 4 hours long.
Yeah.
So go with what I haven't seen. I do want to see it. I just haven't got around to it at the moment. So it is definitely one on my list.
Well, what do you never want to see again?
Do I never want to see it remade?
Yeah.
I don't know. I my gut instinct goes to Back to the Future. Like Back to the Future was one of those films to me which I think is perfect. There are very few perfect films for me, but that one I don't need to see remade. I don't need to see Hot Fuzz remade. Like no one's remaking Hot Fuzz anyway, but that is a really underrated film.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Back to the Future is the one that springs to mind because it just captured the moment so perfectly. Like it is quintessentially 80s. Like you're never going to get another Michael J. Fox. You're never going to get another Christopher Lloyd. And those are the 2 ingredients you need. Now, that being said, I'm open to seeing someone try it again. I just don't think, like, why would you bother?
There is one movie that you don't want to remake, Sirens.
The Elle Macpherson film.
That's okay, just the way it is.
Well, I think that's the perfect way to end the show.
Well, the thing about that is that how old is it?
It's got to be late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, and what a cast!
Yeah, absolutely.
Who was the?
Well, I've never seen Sirens, and like we talked about in the past, and I was like, because I'd never seen this, I thought it was about mermaids, to be honest. And you're like, no, it's not about mermaids. Let me have a look. Sirens. It's this is the part of the show where I look things up on my phone and people. Oh, it's 1994. Hugh Grant. Sam Neill, Elle Macpherson, Portia de Rossi, Ben Mendelsohn, who's fantastic. Look, it's a strong cast, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's and that's one of those things that if you try to remake it, you'd be trying to remake it just to make money, not to, because it's one of those stories which is a little bit Australiana, but because some alligator will jump out and there's the loo and go, that'd be the thing. It's Aussie Steve. Stephen, got him. Sorry about that. Yeah, my little mate here has just been sitting there. Hi, James. That's what's going to happen to me. I'm going to shrink down into that size, and they're going to make me do a cast, and then you can throw me in the water. Well, he might make half a dozen. So there we are. Well, that was interesting.
Certainly was. That's going to do it for this week's episode. Remember, I was a teenage movie snob, but I am trying to get better. We'll see you next week.